Hunter x Hunter's Nen is not only the best power system I've ever come across, but it's also one of the most clever ways of indirect characterization that I've ever seen in storytelling. Of course, in terms of the technical aspects, it is everything that it needs to be, and for those that like to delve into hypotheticals and power scaling and the nitty-gritty details about abilities, there is a vast amount of substance to fuel those sorts of discussions. But personally, I've never been too interested in any of that. The reason that I love this system is because it's so intrinsically linked to the heart of the user that it virtually always enhances said character through showing us the manifestation of their psychology. And with that in mind, today I'm going to be sharing my top 10 Nen abilities in the series in terms of storytelling. Do keep in mind that while a lot of the ones revealed in the current manga arc do have insane potential, I'm going to wait to see how the story plays out before deciding about if any of those would make it to the list. Now, of course, there are lots of great abilities that will not be on the list that I love, with many being very creative and clever for showcasing characterization in a bunch of different ways. But these are just the ones that speak to me personally the most, the ones that I find most powerful. I do have a few honorable mentions that I want to touch on, and the first of these is Uvogen's Big Bang Impact. There's nothing super fancy or complex about this one, but the simplicity is why it works so well for me. Not only is it totally consistent with the explosive and larger-than-life nature of the man himself, but it is essentially an encapsulation of the troops' way of expressing themselves in the only way they know how. Against a world that shunned them and tried to stifle their outcries, the only way they feel they can be heard is through raucous violence. And as shown through the Requiem, Uvo represented all of that, with his Big Bang Impact being a demonstrator of that very sentiment. Next up would be Knuckles' Bankruptcy Chapter 7. Not only is this one the crux of one of the most interesting conflicts throughout the Palace invasion, but it's incredibly indicative of Knuckle as a person and lends you an eye into the psychology of one of the story's gentlest characters. As an ability that lends Nen to others, that makes it so that attacks don't hurt, and that does not end with an opponent dead, but more or less just nullified as a threat, this is one of the more non-violent Nen powers, which makes it as characteristic of its user as anything else, while being the deadly, essential tactical fulcrum of the Palace invasion. I also really love the Surveillance Paper Doll's ability as a summation of the theme I take away from Kaluto the most. Loneliness. A lot of what we can extract from the Zoldyck family is presented in minimalistic, efficient details with lots of subtext that we can then make inferences from. Illumi as a character is a great example of how deep the well can be, and Kaluto is presented in that way too. This is someone who joined the Phantom Troop to save Killua, who, like the other siblings, seems starved for affection and love, and who more than anything else desires connection. The little details are everything with Kaluto, and this ability is one too. A cute little family-esque cutout with holding hands used to spy in on the troop. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to think about this power's origin, how it was likely done or at least thought up to artificially replicate some form of family that never reflected reality, to fantasize perhaps about some ideal family life with laughs and connection and significant communication. Kaluto is great and full of pathos, and this power is a big contributor to that. And the last honorable mention is the only character from the Succession War in this list. I didn't want to include other abilities because I'd like time for the characters and story to progress to see exactly how integrative everything is. But for this one I feel quite certain, and that's because it's tied to one of the most efficient characters in the entire story. Morena Prudo, the woman associated with the Fourth Princess faction, has hardly been shown, but in the brief glimpse we do see of her, she takes absolute center stage. Her design is awesome, and she's given justifiable motivations for her misanthropic endeavors, with a deep malice and disdain for society, and this makes her instantly interesting and simultaneously a reinforcement of Togashi's political ideas. And along with that, her ability, Contagion, is an amazing reflection of all that she has become, a sort of poison that entices all those who submit to her aura, with the origin of the original infection tracing back to mankind's cruelty and then spreading in the present, showing us through this the self-perpetuating cycle of violence, neglect, and cruelty that results in people like Morena. And now we have finally reached my top 10. First up is Hisoka's bungee gum and texture surprise combo, which I feel is one of the most iconic abilities in the story, along with the most memed. But it genuinely is one of the most easy to understand yet widely applicable powers we have, making it a great way for the audience to dip their toes into Nen application in the story early on. And this dynamism and adaptability is reflective of Hisoka and his consistently flexible role in the story, presented really well in 2011 through how they make him seem so imposingly elastic in instances. It shows his fickle, simple nature, the childlike fixation he seems to have on this fun, whimsical candy he remembers from his youth, and the dark implications that could have. Bungee gum also has the properties of two things, but I think they've slipped my mind. This one is arguably the most therapeutic ability, conducted by arguably the most therapeutic character. In a series that can get as dark and psychologically claustrophobic as this one does, many of our characters, and most notably Kurapika, often need to find a way to center themselves in order to not make rash decisions that they may regret later and to have some perspective. And Melody's ability to center others and provide calm is something that I really find effective for adding balance and respite to the arcs she's involved in, along with just being therapeutic to experience. Leorio's punch against Jing in the election arc is one of the most awesome and cathartic moments in the entire series, but it was just one application of a much broader concept intended for multiple purposes, and the crux of why it's so great is touched on later by Jing. Ultimately, this power has roots in Leorio's medical endeavors, and it would allow him to palpate, detect, and safely remove tumors and harmful substances in the body easily and free of charge, in a way that the world didn't allow for when it came to his childhood friend. Kindness is the ultimate goal for the man with the gentle heartbeat, and that honest spirit, that truthful desire for a better world, and that need to help others is shown through this ability. And it's also extremely revealing for his more impulsive side. It's really no wonder that Jing purposely didn't dodge his punch. Illumi's needle manipulation has all manner of uses: hypnosis, transformation, puppeteering, etc. And this leads to many relevant conflicts to be resolved throughout the story, but more than anything, this ability is representative of a sad aspect of the Zoldycks. A family and profession who operate not through affection, connection, and love, but through ruthless, cold indoctrination and strict adherence to an assassin's code from a young age. This is a cycle of abuse, neglect, and manipulation. And while Killua shows in many ways how he is able to break that cycle, Illumi shows the opposite. Unable to see any future but that is laid out in front of him, he perpetuates it and manipulates others as he was manipulated, carrying on the culture that ensnared him. His abilities are the sad manifestation of his chains, and of how all he can do as a result of them is chain others down. Given the resolution of Chimera Ant and Election, it's a very likely possibility that Gon can never use his Jajanken again, and that's actually wonderful for both his character and the story for reasons I've explained in my video about Gon's journey. But nevertheless, the Jajanken was essential for representing all that Gon was, the positives and the negatives. It was childish and cute in a way, especially the origin of the name and it being fixated on rock, paper, scissors, but it's also limited, and most importantly, rigid. Gon was able to adapt to make it more dynamic, but even still, overall it was a power with severe limitations, reflective of his tunnel vision and inability to be flexible in his mentality, and of his immaturity. It was a great way to show Gon's double-edged purity, and its absence will hopefully be just as important as its presence for Gon as he strives towards true maturity. Netero is a character of immense duality, showcasing both the beautiful soul of the human spirit through his gratitude and love for martial arts, and the depths of mankind's darkness. And while the latter is conveyed through his use of the miniature rose, the former is communicated through his 100-type Guanyin Bodhisattva, a show of dedication, resolve, passion, and gratitude. Netero was the pinnacle of human achievement and provided Meruem with enough evidence to shift his views on the species even further and nudge him closer to humanity, and this unbelievable behemoth of a Nen ability is a huge part of the reason why. Hunter x Hunter is a celebration of shonen, and Netero and his power are one of the most prominent indicators of that. The draw and beauty of Meruem's collection of integrative abilities is very similar in some ways to Crollo Lucifer, but it works as a bit of an inverse in this case. Aura synthesis, the ability that allows Meruem to take an aura and in cases obtain abilities through consumption, was the means by which he took metamorphosis from Yuppie and photon from Poof, and all three in combination are so indicative of Meruem. Through this method of ingesting and consuming, he takes in new abilities and uses them for himself. This is very key in illustrating his flexible, dynamic, adaptable, and morphic nature, how he is able to take in knowledge and other perspectives and add them to his own. Meruem is not unbending and ego-driven. He's open-minded and willing to learn about the world to use his power properly, willing to change if given reason to. To me, metamorphosis is representative of how Meruem symbolically spreads his wings in this way, and Photon is the apex of his growth, using an offshoot of spiritual message to detect the emotions, lies, and psychological states of those around him. Basically, Meruem grew to connect with and understand others, and that was what made his life worth living. One of the saddest story elements in Hunter x Hunter is that of Killua's upbringing and his constant battle within and outside of himself to break free of his cruel filial chains. He's often reminded in multiple painstaking ways of how he will never be able to forget his experiences and shake off the marks that they've left on him, and that is simply the nature of trauma. However, what he can do is use those experiences to carve his own path. Having been exposed to electricity from a young age leading to a resistance and affinity to it, Killua is able to harness the thing that represented such anguish for his own means. Here he is able to display his growing self-confidence and desire to take control of his life through taking control of what happened to him and using it for himself. Killua cannot erase his experiences and they will forever be a part of him, but he can strive for new horizons and use this for his own benefit in a manner that only he can. In this way, he is a total diametric contrast to Illumi. Whereas his older brother perpetuates the cycle, Killua is able to break it in such an empowering way. Crollo's Bandit's secret ability is one that allows him to take Nen abilities from others and use them for himself, and there is a beautiful simplicity in what this says about him. We all know that Nen is in some ways a manifestation of a person's identity, and so it's genius that Crollo's Nen ability, and as such, his identity, is totally blank and reliant upon taking from others. Whether this is due to reality, his perception of himself, or both, it is an ability that ties in with the spider, who pillage, kill, and steal due in large part to simply making their mark and engaging with the world in the only way they know how. However, it also shows that he lacks a sense of self. So does he steal from others to better understand others, which could in turn cause him to understand himself? Either way, it's a powerful and efficient way of showing who Crollo is and how he perceives himself, completely bereft and broken. And add to this his later ability to turn humans into zombie-esque puppets integrated with his belief that humans are subjects to the whims of fate, and Crollo's Nen abilities are in my opinion the most integrative in the story. And now we come to what is, in my opinion, the best overall application of Nen for a character in narrative terms in the entire story. Kurapika's collection of chain abilities, particularly the ones that directly relate to his deathly resolve and dedication to restoring honor to his slaughtered Kurta clan. Chain Jail can only be used on members of the Phantom Troop, and if Kurapika disobeys this rule, he dies. Judgment Chain sets a condition on the subject, and if that condition is not adhered to, that person dies. And lastly, there is Emperor Time, an ability that activates when Kurapika's eyes turn scarlet. He then becomes a specialist and unlocks immense potential for all Nen categories, but in return, this state drains his remaining lifespan exponentially for every second that it's activated. This is Kurapika's resolve, a series of abilities that he actively puts his life on the line for, and a sentiment through which he undercuts himself. Kurapika blazes a self-destructive path so antithetical to who he is because he feels that this is his duty for his lost brethren, and these powers just elevate and enrich the sheer weight of that. The longer he does this, the more of his life, and arguably more importantly, himself, he will lose on the way to his goal, and when he reaches it, there could be nothing left. Will he stray from this for his own good? Will he stop for the sake of his true self? Only time will tell, but we can be sure that his Nen abilities will directly reflect his mentality as he navigates through the Succession War. And that's it. These are my current ranked top 10 favorite Nen abilities in Hunter x Hunter in terms of how they apply to the story. Once again, this could change quite a bit once we see more of the Succession War and once I feel comfortable in concluding about exactly how I feel about other powers, but this is what we're working with now. I know that there are literally none of you who will have the same top 10 as me, so please feel free to share your own in the comments. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.